The biggest fallacy I've ever heard about coaching is the client always has the answer within them. Like, no, they don't. You can't coach across a knowledge gap. Innovation, creativity, problem solving, the outputs of coaching conversations is simply connecting previously unconnected data in your brain. If there's a piece of data missing, you're not going to connect it. Right? So sometimes they have to go find the data, put it in, and then you connect it. Where people trip up is getting confused between the difference between teaching somebody, giving somebody the data that's missing versus telling them what to do with it.
Welcome to Coaching Conversations, the show where we dive into the inspiring stories of innovators, coaches, and change makers who are transforming industries and pushing the boundaries of what's possible. I'm your host, Coach Ellen May, and today's guest is Tony Latimer, a Master Certified Coach with the International Coaching Federation. With decades of experience in executive coaching, Tony's worked with leaders and teams across the globe to foster transformational change, both personally and professionally. Known for his practical approach and deep expertise, Tony's dedicated to empowering individuals to unlock their full potential, while shaping the future of leadership in today's fast-paced world. Tony works with senior C-suite executives who need fast, effective coaching that matches the pace and pressure of their roles. His unique approach ensures that clients come to sessions with multiple issues and leave with resolutions for each one within a single session. Having first encountered coaching in the early 80s, Tony's been at the forefront of shaping how coaching is applied in the workplace. An MCC since 2008, he's a founding member and a past president of ICF Singapore, and has contributed to several ICF global task forces on coach training. Tony's also pioneered a new model of coach training through his MCC Mastery Level membership program, offering advanced masterclasses focused on the simplicity of mastery, emphasizing pure connected presence in coaching. Get ready for a conversation filled with insights, strategies, and actionable advice to elevate your leadership game. Welcome to Coaching Conversations, Tony. I'm very excited to have you here. And I'm going to say as well, I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm not someone that gets nervous. And I think it's purely because questioning and asking the right questions is so incredibly important when it comes to coaching. And I feel a little bit like if Djokovic, knocked on your door and said, do you want to come and play a game of tennis? That's how I feel a little bit like today. So thank you so much for even being on the podcast. So if we can perhaps begin, Tony, with you explaining exactly what being a master coach means to our listeners.
Exactly what it means. Okay, the global definitive definition. I'll give you my definition. So coaching is the process of making people think. And particularly in organizations, we coach for behavioral change. That's it. And my definition of coaching is helping somebody to get absolute clarity on where they are now, absolute clarity on where they want to be or need to be, from which they will get absolute clarity on what they need to do differently to get there. The magic happens in the middle, because that's the bit. So if we go to what is masterful coaching, it's coaching at the speed of thought, so that we're taking people deep into their subconscious, so that processes run thousands of times faster. And for me, coaching comes in two flavors. We have Newtonian physics, where it's the words I say, the things I see, what I can hear. And you can do Newtonian physics up to and including getting over the bar to an MCC. The difference is that to get the MCC level, you have to let go of a few things. One, you have to let go of models and structures and prepared questions. It's a fully present, connected, in the moment experience. And then beyond that, it's it's quantum physics. It's a little bit like martial arts. You've got the black belt, now you learn to do the higher levels. And that is where we're moving into the realm of using energy.
And tell me about that energy then.
Um, so, as Einstein said, everything in the universe is made of energy. Your energy, I'm energy, just in a different form. And the space between us is just energy. So, everything in the universe is made of energy. The law of conservation of matter means nothing can be created or destroyed. So it is it's about learning to recognize that everything is connected because it's energy, and then learning how to read that and work with that.
Wow, interesting. So tell me a little bit about then what led you to pursue a career in coaching.
Oh, two things. The first one, so my corporate life, I was a techie. I went through all the different jobs, messing with the mainframes at midnight, programming systems analysis, and eventually when software packages and ERP systems started to emerge, going into pre-sales and business development work. And back in the early 80s, I was working for a software company that was an IBM business partner, and IBM were running a leadership program, and I got offered a place. I can only assume because I was messing up spectacularly at managing people. Um, But the program was fascinating. We went to a country house in Surrey, Ravenhurst, I think, if I remember rightly, and we spent a week doing Timothy Galway's tennis coaching in a game program. So this was all about just learning to coach people playing tennis, and it was phenomenal and it worked. But when I asked the people teaching us at the end, they went, I get it, this works. How does it help me manage people? They went, meh, don't know really. We're sports guys. We're trying to figure it out. So that stuck with me. And Galway's performance equation, performance equals potential minus interference, stuck in my brain. And my brain was going like this, there's something important about this. Beyond the way he's using it for sports, there's got to be something else to it. And that was what took me back to work to do the usual techie thing of I'll figure this out, and it all went from there really. Yeah.
So Tony, it sounds like you've got a very scientific and analytical mind, the way that you speak about things.
Hmm.
Coaching is obviously about the person being present, being able to be an excellent listener. How do you combine all of that?
Well, for a start, you have to see. One of the problems with coaching, particularly at the more advanced levels, is that we don't have language to describe it. So what happens and what confused me in the early days when I moved into doing coaching full time was people used fluffy language. So it all felt a bit tree hugging. They're saying, you must listen to what is not being said, grasshopper. And I'm going like, so which ear does that come in? You know? And with something like, I mean, when I got my MCC, I was like 103 in the world. So before that, there was no training because there's no market for it. And you had to kind of wander around the world. It was a bit like a rerun of 2012. You climb to the monastery at the top of the hill, sit at the feet of the master while they pour tea into an overflowing cup and try and figure out the meaning of that. So people were telling me stuff and I was going like, I'm sorry, I don't get it. And it was only when I met some people who taught me the energy work, and then I went, okay, Forget all this fluffy language. This is just physics. It is all just physics. So ignore the fluffy language and really try and figure out what's happening. So my breakthrough came after I took the MCC exam and passed it. It was kind of like, oh my God, I passed. And the significance of that is this means I can do it. And if you can do something, and if you can analyze it correctly, you can codify it. And if you can codify it, you can teach it. So that was the really big thing of going, because I have this very logical, analytical brain, I can analyze what I do, I can codify it, I can go to, I mean, that's why we call the coach training program the simplicity of mastery. I can analyze it to its simplest components. Because again, another thing Einstein said that was useful was if you correctly analyze something to its simplest components, you get a universal truth, something that will pretty much work everywhere. And once you do that, you can then teach it to anybody. You can teach mastery to beginners.
Okay, that's very interesting, and I definitely want to delve a little bit deeper into that then. So, tell me a little bit about teaching mastery to beginners then. Where do you even begin?
I go back to my definition of coaching, that clarity on the now, clarity on the future. Because if you look at what's normally taught, coaching models, and all models are wrong, if I'm quoting correctly, all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. The mistake that people make is they get taught a coaching model and they try to follow it as a step-by-step process. And that is inherently incorrect. That wasn't when I guess John Whitmore with the GROW model, that was probably the first one that was sort of written and publicized. And it wasn't meant to be a sequential model. It was an analysis that the majority of good coaching sessions typically, not always, but typically weave their way backwards and forwards through these four areas. But you get an acronym, the marketing people get hold of it and they call it the GROW model. And particularly when you go into corporate, you give somebody a model and they think, oh, step one, step two, step three. And it just doesn't work. So you have to realize that, yes, you've got to establish, so all models start with the goal. What's the goal? Well, in some cases where we're applying coaching, if I'm your boss and I'm bringing you in to give you a little bit of feedback and then we're going to do some coaching on your performance, I own the agenda and the goal, not you. I'm not going to bring you in and go so what's your goal? Showing up for the meeting, boss, because you called me in, right? So to help people, to make it work, you just have to establish, why are we having this conversation? So what's the topic or what's the outcome you look for? But then you've got to go to this now to future piece, because if you don't know where you are, you can't go anywhere. So if somebody came into your room just right now, stuck a bag over your head, bundled you into a van, drove you in figure of eight around the countryside for an hour, and then dumped you in a place where you'd never been before, and it's dark, and pulled the hood off, I get it. You'll want to go home, but you have no idea which direction to go. So you can't go anywhere unless you're absolutely clear where you are now. And as you help somebody getting clarity on, so where are you now? What's the real problem? You find you start going below the issue or the problem that really started the conversation to something a lot deeper. I'll give you an example. When you're coaching leaders in organizations, guarantee you'll come up against the problem where a manager goes, okay, I've got a staff member underperforming. So that's my problem. How do I get this person to perform? But that's not his actual problem. His underlying issue may be his fear of the emotional reaction he will get if he gives the guy some direct feedback. And once you can break it down like that, you can teach anybody. I've spent 25 years teaching coaching skills to managers at all levels, and they all get it. Within 3 days in a workshop, they can have a perfectly good coaching conversation where they help somebody solve a problem in about 20 minutes. And I haven't seen a lot of coaches come out of a 60-hour coach training program who could achieve that.
That's fantastic. I think the way that you just explain it is exactly what you package. It's the simplicity of it, isn't it? And breaking
Yes.
it down into
Yes.
its simplest form.
Yeah.
So, how has your coaching philosophy evolved over time then, Tony, or has it always remained consistent?
How has my coaching philosophy? Go on, tell me what you mean by coaching philosophy.
So, we've got external factors, haven't we? The world changes constantly, where things move faster now. The demands that are perhaps put upon people are slightly different. Our environments have changed over time. Very different now living to how, people were living in the 1980s.
Yes.
Has your coaching philosophy had to adapt with the changes that us as humans have gone through, or are we still essentially the same?
We we are still essentially the same, but you are right, the environment has changed. So from a pure coaching perspective, um, things have to move faster. So I give you two examples. I I work a lot with coaches who in their earlier years are saying, I'm struggling with sort of pinning down like what's the goal and how they're going to get there, whatever. And they're talking about client comes to a coaching session and it takes several coaching sessions to really establish what they're working on and make some progress. My clients come to their coaching sessions with the list of the 4 or 5 things they need to resolve in this next hour. They have to move faster. Um, Corporate people don't have the time. As you said, everything's moving faster. They don't have the time. So if you're going to coach them, you've got to learn to coach at the speed of thought. We've got to make things process a lot quicker. And look at a parallel to that. 20 years ago, I used to take leadership teams away for some in-depth learning, analysis, and whatever. We would literally take them out of Singapore, off to one of the islands, and we would have them working for 5, 6, 7 days, working during the day, thinking, discussing, then a bit of dinner, and then nothing to do but gaze at the stars and think about the learning. So wonderful. Then it came down to, we need to keep it down to about 4 days, and then 3 days. And then a few years ago, we got to the stage they were going, yeah, is it going to take a whole day? So that time pressure comes. And now you can reduce things with techniques. You can re-engineer how you do it. But eventually you get to that point where, I need to rethink. So an example, for the last 7 or 8 years, we've been doing 2 to 3 day workshops for leadership as their sort of first step into shifting how they are. We now do it as a 4 hour masterclass because I had to completely redesign what we teach because there's no longer the time. They can't spend the time on it.
That's interesting. But do you feel as a coach delivering it that you're able to deliver exactly what you set out to do in that given time as well?
Actually, interestingly, yes, because, and this is where constantly working on what you're doing and thinking about it and analyzing it more. So, for example, you connect with an organization and they're going to want a few things to happen. They want employee engagement to go up. They want managers to step out of the detail and stop being the problem solver. They want them to proactively develop their people's capabilities, have personal development plans in place. They want them to learn how to be more strategic and look to the future of what's coming. So all these outcomes that we're looking for. So we used to do workshops where we went into all those, 5 or 6 areas. Now we teach them one thing, because when I did the reanalysis of it, and this took about 18 months of thinking, but eventually it became clear that if we can get them to do just one thing, all those other things happen. And we call the program Leadership at the Speed of Thought, because basically we focus on just teaching the leaders in every interaction you have with everybody, just focus on making them think. And that triggers all the other stuff. So it was like getting down to everything I've been teaching all these years. What's the real, what's a little bit of compressed coal? What's the bit of gold or the diamond at the bottom of it? Yeah. And when you find that, you go, oh, now everything becomes so much easier.
So tell me about some success stories then, Tony, because I think people love to hear about success stories that your work has been implemented and it's totally transformed either an individual or an organization.
Mm. Yeah, a few stand out. One of the first organizations that I did a big project with, leadership training, team stuff, individual coaching, group coaching, and rapid organizational change. Probably almost 25 years ago now, very first project, and the most junior person, the trainee who just joined the organization, was in the room. Loved it. And when I reconnected with the organization 20 years later, that person was the general manager. They were at the top of the organization. And I've had a number of those going on. I remember doing some workshops about 12, 14 years ago for one of the big global hotel chains. And the GM, who was just a few years away from retiring, brought his new management trainee to the workshop. And again, connected with that person in the last 2 years, they're now the GM. So we've had a few of those where I've worked with big global software organizations, helping somebody make 2 big leaps up into the regional president role, and then a few years later seeing them, first female on the global board. And I've got a number of those that have really worked well. With the organizational change, the building the leadership teams, I think the funniest one in recent years with another global software company, where my job was to coach somebody who was just joining into the regional managing director role. And there were like 3 regional managing directors around the world. And the brief was get them into that role, but get him ready for a global role within 2 years, which means very quickly into the job, he's got to start looking for a successor. Oh, and by the way, we hired him because he's a genius who knows every bit of the business and he won't find anybody like him. So he's going to have to replace himself with a good leader, but who doesn't know all the details, which means the business has to be able to run without him. He can't just replicate himself because it doesn't exist. So that the implication there was, okay, we need to look at his leadership team and get them working cohesively as what I label it as the team that runs the business. So that was the bit. And the acid test is, could the business head be abducted by aliens and the business still runs. And then they have a problem, and that leadership team come together and solve the problem, and the business still runs. So that was it. Anyway, we worked on it. After about 12 months, they had a new HR director join them. And he came into the company, he attended a few of the meetings, and on week 2, he invited the MD out for lunch. And when they sat down for lunch, and he said, "So tell me, when are you leaving?" And it was like, "What? What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, come on." He said, "I've been here 2 weeks. This leadership team operates without you. You've set it up beautifully. The only reason you'd be doing that was because you're leaving." So then he said, "Okay, you're my regional HR, so let's keep it confidential, but I can share it with you. Yes, within 12 months, I'm going to be moving to a global role. I'm not leaving the company, but I'm leaving the position." But it was just beautiful to hear that third-hand evidence that what we were working on, he was trying to achieve, had actually worked. It's great to see. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. So tell me, Tony, then, you say on your website, and you've seen firsthand throughout your career the power of coaching. And you say on your website, the world needs more high quality, effective coaches, and that you're on a mission to make that happen. Tell me what you define as being a high quality coach.
It's 2 things. It's depth and it's speed. So the ability to take people down deep to get the breakthrough that they need. Not just that, oh, here's the answer to the problem that I brought, because that's not going to be the human realm for very long. So it's going beyond the transactional stuff to get people down to deep places where they get a breakthrough. Because when you take people down deep, you're actually coaching time travel. Because if people can't resolve something, it's because they're bouncing around looking for the answer within the boundaries of the beliefs they hold about the situation. And there's certain keys that you listen for and detect, which take you very fast down to the bottom of the subconscious where the beliefs sit. And when you can get somebody up against the belief, articulated or not, and you can push them through it, they get their breakthrough. Then the answer is out there. You know, they can, once they've gone through that boundary, they can now access the infinity of other possibilities that will form their solution. So they'll find it. Once you've done that, you have not just solved the problem that triggered the conversation. You have broken through the belief that was holding them back. Therefore, you have solved every potential future problem that they would have had if they'd held on to that belief. So literally, you've changed the path of their life in a very dramatic way. It's phenomenal stuff. The second part is I think the speed. And testing that one is simple. Are you a coach where your client has to have several coaching sessions to solve a problem, or are you a coach where they solve multiple problems in one session?
Gosh, you've got me really, really thinking here. Yes, and I'm certainly learning a lot from you. So, so you've worked with a lot of the world's senior leaders. Are there actual common obstacles that people come to you with, or is it very, very general? Or have you, over the years, managed to hone down, what people's really subconscious kind of problems are?
Um, a few things. I'd split it into common stuff organizationally and common stuff personally. So the single most common thing that comes up when you're coaching somebody to operate at a higher level in an organization is their emotional attachment to the reason they got promoted. Because we generally we take the best one on the team and we make them team manager. So best techie gets made techie manager, you know, and it happens everywhere. So you're promoting, this is really stupid because you're promoting somebody based on their ability to do the job they are leaving. And the most common issue I face when they come to me and say, look, we promoted this person into the next level of leadership and it's kind of not quite working the way we wanted, it's almost always because there is a lack of clarity on what was expected. So without a clarity on here's what this level looks like, then they get stuck with that attachment to the reason for their success. Because global habits, people have a problem, instinctively most of us just turn to the boss and go, hey boss, got a problem, what shall I do? At which point your ego goes, aha, this was why I got promoted, step aside, let me go in. And when you're spending all your time doing that, you don't have the time to do the more strategic thinking. Because it's not that you can't do strategic thinking. I've proven that everybody can. But the thing that holds them back is it's just the availability of time. Time is the biggest challenge that people managers tend to face. What was the other half? The personal bit. Everybody's different, but one of the threads that keeps popping up is that people get really stuck because they are incorrectly allowing something from the past to attach to the present.
Interesting. So I think you just described almost every leader in the world there as well. I could, see my brain just moving a million miles an hour when you were talking about that and thinking about how people lead their teams. Interestingly enough, Richard Branson posted last night a picture of him with his mentor that he's had throughout his career. And I commented on the picture and saying, if I had a coach or a mentor when I was 23, when I started my business, I would undoubtedly be a different leader, probably a different person, possibly a better person. Because it's an extremely lonely place, especially being an entrepreneur and especially being that young as well.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the power of coaching, wherever someone is in their life, do you truly believe that anyone can benefit from having a coach, whatever they do, whether they're in healthcare, whether they're a personal trainer, whatever they do?
Hmm. I'll refine the common thing that gets said is everybody needs a coach, and that's not quite true. Everybody could benefit from having a coach from time to time. You don't need a coach all the time, but when you want to dramatically shift stuff and go to a different level or have things different, then yes, coaching really helps. And if coaching had existed when maybe I was in the sort of 25 to 40 range, stuff that I'm currently sitting here thinking, here's what I want to achieve over the next 20 years, would have already been done by now. So I think if I'd had somebody like me available to me when I was younger, then for sure um, I could have been at least 20 years further ahead than I am now.
Hmm. So that leads me on to asking then, Tony, whether anyone at any age can actually coach someone if they follow, for example, your simplicity of mastery, or does listening and the skills required to become an excellent coach evolve over time as we evolve and develop ourselves and grow up essentially?
Yes, I haven't decided what I want to be when I grow up, but you're right. There's the there's some advantages of having a few miles on the clock because so when you coach the way I teach it, you have to you go into a coaching conversation and you have no idea, no prepared questions, no plan. Apart from that, let's get absolute clarity on where you are now and absolute clarity on where you want to be. And then we're just going to go deep and trigger the thinking process. Now, when you listen from your subconscious, the coaching is coming from whatever the person just said or did or what happened or what energy you felt. Your subconscious is accessing your body of knowledge and experience. So the more that's in there, the better it can operate. It's not a question of age specifically, because you could be a phenomenally experienced 35-year-old or a very inexperienced 65-year-old. But it is enhanced by the volume of stuff you absorbed, because that's the data that your subconscious is working on. I did read somewhere recently, though, that alluded to human brains not being fully developed until early mid-20s. I'll have to look that one up because I sort of saw it in passing and thought, oh, that's interesting. I kind of assumed that when you were an infant, your brain was fully developed, and then the process was just about putting the data in. But I did read something that was sort of indicating that, teenage years, whatever, your brain isn't still fully developed. In which case, that would seem to indicate that, yeah, maybe get your brain fully developed before you start trying to do this. But the more experience you have, I think the more it facilitates that whole process for sure.
So, on that topic of growth, then, are there any daily or weekly habits that you actually like to maintain to essentially develop your growth and your effectiveness as a coach as well?
Yes, a few things. So lots of it working. Because we mentioned before about the energy, learning to work on the energy. That's like going to the gym and developing your muscles. That growth never stops. You get stronger. So daily practices to work with the energy and strengthen your ability to do that is an ongoing thing. The other thing is, they say you only really learn something when you have to teach it to somebody. So I guess I've got an advantage because whether it's the corporate world or more recently with other professional coaches, as well as doing the coaching, I've always been teaching it and in different applications. So that certainly helps. Um, and um, I think you've got to keep reading, listening. You just got to keep adding more data in. But for me, one of the key things is don't just read stuff. So I know the way my brain works is it can't really learn something unless it understands it. So if anybody sort of goes like, oh, here's the latest theory, and here's what this guru says is correct, my brain goes, oh, well, you may say that, but I'm going to tear it apart until I completely understand it and either agree with you or improve it or disagree. So very proactive learning, not just read some stuff and go, wow, that's the latest thing I've just read and that's right. No, think it through, analyze it, prove to yourself that it's right, and strengthen the mental muscles.
How important is reflection to you?
Oh, very, very. Um, so I do, and in the way we teach our program for coaches, it's all about get a little bit of knowledge every week and then reflect on it, decide how you can apply it. Next week, you're going to sit down and go, okay, I applied that. How did that work? How did it not? That's the whole process of thinking about and analyzing and reflecting what you're doing that's triggering the neuroplasticity. That's creating the new neural pathways. That is the best way to do it, because then you've got really solid stuff. Just memorizing something does very little for you. Yeah, you've really got to do that. And I also, for years now, I've been running um, community of practices for my local ICF chapters, where this is just volunteer work, where we're designing and taking people through processes to enhance their skills and teaching others to facilitate that process as well. Because again, when you've got some nicely designed processes facilitating people through that learning, you are learning more than they are.
So tell me a little bit about that story, because that's what this reminds me of. When you gave that demo, when you were showcasing an actual live coaching session, and how the questions that were asked afterwards became relevant a few days or even a few weeks later.
Oh, yes. Right, yes, I remember that one. Yes. So that was coming up. We've done Simplicity and Mastery is now about 18 months old. It was the year before that. That's right. So Gail Moore over in the States, who's got a membership program where she gets MCCs to come in and talk about stuff, play recordings that passed an exam and that kind of thing. Yes, after about 5 years of nagging, Gail finally persuaded me to come and do something. And I went, okay, so let's, huge live audience, let's just do a coaching demo and see what happens. And it was good. It went from sort of nothing to breakthrough in less than 30 minutes, so that was good. But Gail then has got her audience sitting there expecting another 45 minutes of content. And she went, so Tony, could you just take us through what you did there? What happened? Why did you ask those questions? And I've just gone like, Gail, I have no idea. I was in there coaching with no plan from the subconscious. I have no idea what I just did. So I can't remember how I got out of the next 45 minutes of that session, but it's a blur. But it must have been a tad disappointing. But effectively, what was happening was that I was then asking myself, like, what the hell did I do? And the next morning, I was down in the gym, body physically occupied, working up a bit of a sweat. And suddenly my brain exploded and my subconscious went, hey, that question you asked like last night about what did you do during that coaching session? Well, here it is. And I couldn't do anything to stop it. My mind just flooded with a complete replay of that 30-minute coaching session. And I suddenly had absolute clarity. Like, when I asked this question at 10 minutes in, it was because of this thing that she said at 4 minutes in. It was like I could see in my head a transcript of the conversation and see all the linkages. It was phenomenal. So I buzzed Gail and went, we have to do another session. Yeah. Sell it to people that they listen to the recording, and then I'll come in and tell them, here's what I did, and we'll do the analysis. It's so much fun. Yeah. But
Wow. So
your subconscious can do stuff. Yeah.
that's insane. Wow. Tony, you are the walking, talking chat GPT, the original AI, aren't you? I can just
One
imagine it
to a
all
lot of.
downloading now, the
Yeah.
version of
Yeah.
it.
Right.
So, talking about AI then, if anyone goes on your website, which they'll see in the link below this video, you've developed an AI tool to accompany what you do, haven't you? Tell me a little bit about, first and foremost, what you think about AI. And I'm going to do a stacked question here. Sorry, coaches listening.
Go for it.
What you think about AI and how you're utilizing AI in your coaching.
Good. So we got another hour, right?
Yes, we have.
Okay. So first off, when the very first iPad launched, my brain went, "Ooh, I know what to do with that." And I developed, or I didn't develop, I didn't do the coding. I paid somebody else to do that, but I designed a very sophisticated coaching app, not to do the coaching, but to support coaching. So for interactions and on-demand learning and tracking objectives and measuring feedback and progress and all that kind of stuff. So I was very, very early in looking at how can we use technology to support coaching. Now, it sounded grand the way you said it, that I developed an AI. No, I didn't. I found an available service that has GPT-4 as its communication mechanism, and you subscribe to that service, and then you train it on a private database of your content. So I spent a few months gathering everything I could find that I have ever said or written about leadership. So pretty much like 30 years worth of content. I think it was somewhere in the half to 750,000 words by the time I tidied it all up. So my clients are supported by having a tool they can get, which on demand, you're stuck, you're at work, you've got that, oh, what do I do now? Here's my problem. It's sort of chat GPT for leadership. You go in, you ask a question, and it's just going to answer from my knowledge base. And people find that tremendously useful. So it bundles for my clients. Coaches in the training program get free access to it because they're coaching people who are asking questions like that. And they sometimes get stuck. It's like, here, use this. And people can just go and subscribe to it on their own if they want to. So I'm using AI, and it is not, definitively, I do not call it an AI coaching tool. It's not coaching. It's leadership training. It's a mentor. You know, in the way if you've got a problem, you call your mentor up and say, "So what would I do about this team member who's a bit like this?" It's that kind of functionality. So it allows people to go and do some learning and get some fresh ideas and bring those to the coaching sessions. Because the biggest fallacy I've ever heard about coaching is the client always has the answer within them. Like, no, they don't. You can't coach across a knowledge gap. If somebody, right, innovation, creativity, problem solving, the outputs of coaching conversations is simply connecting previously unconnected data in your brain. If there's a piece of data missing, you're not going to connect it. Right? So sometimes they have to go find the data, put it in, and then you connect it. Where people trip up is getting confused between the difference between teaching somebody, giving somebody the data that's missing versus telling them what to do with it. So we don't tell them what to do with it. That's their bit of thinking. So it's a coach, teach, coach. Coach to find out what data might be missing, give them the data somehow, or get them to get the data, and then coach them to put the connections together and implement. Okay, what was the rest of the question? What do I think about
Well,
AI?
can I say thank you, first of all, for saying that? Because I think every young coach hears exactly what you just said about that
Mm,
the answer lies within them. And I think that if we begin as young coaches thinking that the answer lies within them, then there's a fear then. And I think
mm,
that that fear then takes you to a place where you're not being able to be fully present because you're exactly like you said, you're afraid to give the answer. But exactly how you worded it there, that there are gaps, I think is incredibly valuable to know. So, yes, the second half of
mm.
the question was, how are
And
you utilizing it?
right. So, but in refinement to that one though, that is what I've stated is the truth. However, you can't use that as a license to go like, let's start giving advice, because I have had so many instances where I'm coaching a leader and they've got a problem and they seem a bit stuck. And as always, we can't help it. We were born to solve problems. So my brain's going, well, I know what you should do. Okay, there's some advice. But you keep your mouth shut and you let them think, and the answer that came as obvious to you eventually comes as obvious to them. And then they come up with it. So that will happen a lot of the time. But where there is genuinely a knowledge gap, it's good to have a way of them getting the knowledge, and then you help them through that thought process of, well, okay, that's learning, but your context is different. How would you apply this and make it work in your situation? How do you feel about doing that? So some real deep coaching on the back of it. Okay, second part of the question. AI?
Yes, AI. Or I can reframe the question if you want.
Go
And
on.
I would like to know whether the AI is constantly learning as well as we are, the more people you have using your tool.
Um, so the way I'm using it for my tool, what I'm seeing is that the more it gets used, the more it takes, because it can't access the internet, so it's only accessing my data. But I have seen answers where it's combining bits of information that it wouldn't have previously, that weren't necessarily combined in the first place. So it is learning by doing. It's making connections between things. But that's just, that's not intelligence. That's just the nature of generative AI. It's predicting the next word, and it's now discovered that, oh, there's four other possibilities here. So that's kind of how it works. Um, if you were asking about the future of AI for coaches, yeah. So I think the future is bright, but you've got to make sure you've got your eyes open, because there's a couple of coaching tools. I test every one I can get my hands on, and some of them are really still just rubbish, but some of them are quite okay. So, for example, about twice a week, I use Sam Isaacson's tool, and it's if I was giving it an ICF assessment for credentials, definitely passes an ACC. Um, Depending on your assessor, maybe it gets close to a PCC, maybe not, but they will soon. And
Mm.
if you go into it, I mean, I tend to go into it to give them a hard time and try and test them, right? Um, but if you go in there with the intention of saying, this is a tool I've been given, and it's just to help me think through my goals, check my action plans, transactional, help me do my job sort of coaching, and you go in as a willing person deciding I'm going to be coachable about this. And when it asks me a question, even if it's not a question that necessarily forces me to think in the way a human coach could, if it asks me a question, I'm going to think about it. So if you go in with that willingness, you'll find that these are actually quite useful tools. So we're not that far away We're not many years away when we look at exponentially how the stuff is getting better, from having some incredibly useful tools that are worth rolling out to large numbers of employees in all sorts of organizations. So I think the opportunity then, as I see it, is people will become aware of coaching who weren't aware of it before. I mean, just think about how many people are aware of AI that weren't 3 years ago. Now, AI has been around for a long time. It's only the generative style of AI that's new. But very few people understood or even knew about it, let alone thought it was something that they could use in their job day to day. Now you can. How many people have adopted it and really use it in a serious way every day? Oh, probably a relatively small number. But as those who do start to, so we had a session, for example, in our ICF chapter just recently, where somebody from the UK, who was it? Colin Scotland, came in and said, okay, if you're trying to create your ideal client avatar to get your marketing rights to find and attract clients, here's some prompts you can use, and here's some information you need to give it. And then it'll come up with some nice text, which will just help you put the work further forward. And I could hear the people in the room who kind of, yeah, we've heard of AI and ChatGPT, but don't really use it. You could hear them waking up and going like, oh my God, you use this and I don't. Damn, I need to get on the train. And I think that's going to happen. People are going to start waking up to the way coaching can be used and how it can help organizations. I'll give you one example so I've had a couple of interesting thoughts about this. One is what's going to happen to credentials. So if you've got a competent PCC level coaching chatbot, will people buy it without a credential, or who's going to give it a credential? And then when that happens, if you're an external coach and you've only got an ACC or a PCC credential, what's the value of that? So you can now do it just as well as the machine can. Maybe you need to up your skills a bit. The other interesting thing is we, the training industry, have spent decades trying to help managers lead better, stop being the problem solver, develop your people, etc., etc. And the fact that it's still a growing business means it never really works very well. A small percentage get trained and turn into good leaders, and the others still struggle. And we know that because the next generation of new managers have the same problems all over again. So managers have an inbuilt difficulty managing people. Now, we all believe in the ideal is that we turn them into good leaders. But there is another option. Don't bother being a good leader and just give your people a chatbot. So when they've got a problem, they go talk to the chatbot. And I don't think that's an ideal world, but that might catch on. It's suddenly like, oh, there's an easy one.
Would that potentially free up time for leaders then to be able to perhaps focus on other things as well?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? So one of the biggest things we work on with leaders is how they stop being the problem solvers and become the coach to their people, to free up the time for them to spend more time being more strategic. But this could be another route there. Now, when you free up these leaders, yes. So when you've got organizations now using coaching via chatbots that don't use coaching at the moment, and these people are freed up to be more strategic, maybe that's when the few people at the top of the organization go, maybe I need somebody to talk to. So that could lead to a growth of human coaching requirement at the higher levels of organizations that don't use it at the moment.
Mm. And perhaps being able to coach and get to the root of the problem even quicker, because all of that kind of almost mess that they're used to dealing with is kind of pushed to the side. So let's talk a little bit about what you're offering with the simplicity of mastery then as well. So you've got two levels, the foundations and full contact. Can you just tell anyone listening, Tony, exactly what you have developed, please?
Sure. So the problem I was out to solve in the first place was the one that I was discussing with my sort of fellow ICF assessors, that the majority of people get their PCC, and then you've got to get another 2,000 hours before you can look at MCC. So the average, and I got these numbers from ICF, the average coach with a reasonable practice spends maybe 6 years or 7 years getting that number of hours together. During that time, you do your credential renewal twice. And for each credential renewal, you have to do 40 hours of continuous education. So by the time you get to enough hours for MCC, two things have happened. One, you don't feel the need to spend money on training because you've already got your training hours ticked. And two, you've been practicing coaching at a PCC level for 7 years. So you've got some fairly thoroughly ingrained habits. And then you expect 10 hours of mental coaching to flip your skills up massively. And the reason you've got this massive jump in hours required of practice is because it's a massive jump in skills. And with the best will in the world, 10 hours of mental coaching can't do that, because some mentor coaches could teach you, but most of them are really good mentor coaches, not coach trainers. They're not necessarily teaching what I'm teaching. So my idea was, instead of waiting till the last minute and then paying thousands of dollars in a lump sum for a course to try and get you up there, why don't we start earlier? So the minute you've passed your PCC, start training for the next one in the way that any athlete does. Yeah, when you've just won that medal, you start training for the next one. You don't carry on running at the same speed for 5 years and then wonder why you don't get the gold in the next race, right? You've got to keep moving. So the idea is twofold. You can have fully asynchronous learning. So I've developed a gradual 18 months of work, which just says spend an hour a week. That's all. 1 hour a week. You get a short video, which introduces a new thing. Study that a few times and figure out, what could I apply next week with my clients? And then to your point on reflection, next week, first thing you do is look back and go, so how did that work? What questions have I got? And what am I learning from my new piece this week? So every week you get a little new piece of knowledge that you can go and apply. So if you do it properly, week by week, you're just getting a little bit better. And that gets you there. Yeah. I had one of my coaches last year. He started with us in February, and he'd been trying to get his MCC for quite a long time. He paid thousands for training and failed. He paid thousands for mentor coaching and failed. And then starting with us in February, by I think September, he got his MCC because he just like, oh, here's something new. So it works. So you have your guided bit by bit learning, but at the same time, you've got a huge knowledge base. There's a lot of recorded coaching demos, so you can do self-study. You can analyze those to death, analyze them against what I'm teaching, analyze them against the core competencies, and then you bring your questions to the live sessions. The idea is that on the full contact program, which is really, if you're a PCC and you're serious, that's where you should be. And 4 times a month, we have a 90-minute tutorial where you bring in, what's my questions I need deep dive? What did I apply with my clients? What worked, what didn't? So we go deep dive on learning. We go we do practice coaching, and most importantly on that one, we start teaching them the energy work, because you have to do that live. So we're already shifting them not to get over the bar coaching, but how to do the more advanced stuff. So that's the full contact. The foundations is exactly the same learning, but foundations has two objectives. One, I found that there were ACC coaches with a fair amount of experience, but who were a long way and maybe weren't interested in getting as far as MCC from a credentialing. They just want to bring mastery into their client coaching conversations. Yeah? And you can teach mastery to beginners, so they can come in. So that one is at a lower price point, and we do one live tutorial a month for them. Because they've got plenty that they can go and apply, and it'll make a difference. My biggest objective with that one, though, was to try and spread the availability of learning coaching skills to the lower cost economies around the world, where coaching is still a minority elitist thing that costs thousands of dollars. So, you can get coach training in Nigeria, you can get coach training in Kenya, for example, but it's going to cost you a couple of thousand US dollars. That's a lot of money. But there's lots of parts of the world where, never mind building a pool of credentialed coaches, if people were just able to add coaching style to the way they communicate, lots gets better in the world. So that foundations option is to just say, hey, let's see if we can spread this as a thing to the rest of the world.
I was just going to say that whatever you're doing, Tony, is coming from a good place, because I think you truly, truly believe in it and have seen firsthand as well how incredibly valuable coaching can be.
Yes, I would agree. Yeah.
And I've taken so much away from this conversation. I think I'm going to have to reflect on it. And perhaps, when I'm at the gym tomorrow morning, I will too have that download of this conversation. Who knows? But what's the one piece of advice that you'd like people that have listened to this podcast to take away with them, whether they're a leader, whether they're a coach? What would it be?
One piece of advice to the universe. Wow, if I open my mouth on that one, that's going to sound phenomenally pretentious. I'm not sure I've got one piece of advice. Hey, you've hit a blank there.
Okay.
Pinning it down to one piece of advice. Oh, ask me a question slightly differently.
Okay, so in terms of people listening to this podcast, if they could make one change for the better in their life, what would it be?
No, listen. Yeah, listen. The fundamental that triggers everything in terms of the coaching skills, the leadership skills, is really learning to listen. In life, nobody actually listens to anybody. We're hearing, we're waiting for that verbal full stop that says, you've finished, now it's my turn. And learning to empty your conscious awareness, get into that clear meditative space so that you're listening from your subconscious, gives people a communication experience like they've never had before. Yeah, that shift. And it is the one thing that once you practice it, starts to trigger the ability to start working with that energy and getting that energy connection with people. Because the energy work is not new. So I've often reflected on, since I managed to learn it, and I was the techie, how did I learn it? How am I managing to teach it to others? Because it's not new. It's an inherent human ability that we have lost over time. And some of us have just discovered how to reawaken it. And learning to listen deeply from your subconscious seems to start to trigger that ability back again.
Wonderful. Amazing piece of advice. And I have to say, Tony, you took me back to school there when you asked me to reframe that question. So I hope I did it. Hope I did it correctly. I've got a knot in my stomach now after that. But
I'm sorry.
Thank you for putting me on the spot. It did, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being such a wonderful guest on Coaching Conversations. All of Tony's details will be in the information below. Link to his website, link to his LinkedIn profile, and lots of information about him as well. And I'm definitely going to sign up to the Simplicity of Mastery as well. Have you got any closing words?
I was going to say yes. If people are sitting there going like, okay, I need to do this, because there's no commitment. You can sign up. And if it's not for you, you'll find out very quickly. If you wanted to just get a feel, we can put a link in there. I've got the first overview module of the program is actually available free. So you can just so if you want to spend a few dollars and invest in yourself, go for it right now and start. If you're not sure, if you want to get a feel, we'll give you the link for the First Steps program to go and try it out.
Fantastic, brilliant. Definitely. I'm gonna do that later today. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful guest. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. Like I said, all of Tony's details will be below. Thank you for listening.
This has been Coaching Conversations. I'm Coach Ellie Mai. My guest has been Tony Latimer. Thank you so much for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.